All right, so Republicans are back at it again, demonstrating just how far they are willing to go to prevent even a crumb of stimulus from being given to average working class people. So, here from the Washington Post, they say Republicans are readying lawsuits to block Biden's student debt plan. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into some of the details here. They say Republican state attorneys general and other leading conservatives are exploring a slew of potential lawsuits targeting President Biden's plan to cancel some student debt, challenges that could limit or invalidate the policy before it takes full effect. And they say in recent days, a number of GOP attorneys general from states including Arizona, Missouri, and Texas have met privately to discuss a strategy that could see multiple cases filed in different courts around the country, according to a person familiar with their thinking who like others spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe the confidential talks. And they got a quote here saying, "We're going through that analysis right now, not only in Arizona, but in other states," said Attorney General Mark Brnovich on Thursday. And he says, "You have a dangerous precedent. Anytime a president thinks that they can unilaterally dismiss debt or transfer wealth from one group to another, it's a huge power grab. The ends can't justify the means." Okay, so hold on, slow it down here, Mark. He says, anytime a president thinks that they can unilaterally dismiss debt or transfer wealth from one group to another group, it's a huge power grab. Okay, so this is an insight into the completely deranged conservative mindset in terms of what should be considered a handout, what should be considered, a handout from the government, or a redistribution of wealth as he's portraying it there, okay? This motherfucker, as well as the other conservatives who have critiques of Biden's student debt cancellation as a wealth transfer, said absolutely goddamn nothing about the 2017 Trump tax cuts, where over 80% of the benefits went to the top 1% of the wealthiest people and corporations in this country. Absolutely nothing, okay? No criticism there whatsoever in terms of that being a wealth transfer, which it absolutely is. But in the case of this student debt cancellation, that's not even a wealth transfer, right? You're talking about debt that is currently owned by the federal government, okay? So when you relieve that debt, you're not giving a handout to people. What you're doing is saying you no longer have an obligation to pay back the debts that you owe to the federal government, okay? So that's not a wealth transfer from the rich to the poor, or even a wealth transfer from the middle class to the poor. That is just the federal government exercising their authority to say that you don't have to pay back those debts, okay? That's not a wealth transfer in the same way that the Trump tax cuts were a direct wealth transfer from the poor to the rich. We know as a part of those Trump tax cuts that middle and lower income people are actually going to see a tax increase over the long run, while the disproportionate benefits, again, go to the richest people in the country. We also have shit like this, right? This article that came out from Time magazine just a couple years ago. The top 1% of Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%, and that's made the U.S. less secure, okay? $50 trillion wealth transfer from the bottom 90% in this country to the top 1% in this country, okay? Talk about a wealth transfer there, right? No word on this from any conservatives whatsoever, okay? This is just a function of the capitalist economic framework that they believe in, but we could also get more specifics, okay? Not just the general wealth transfer that has taken place because of a numerous amount of different policies that have been deployed by conservatives and liberals over the last number of decades, but also just in the recent PPP loans, for example, which is something that people have been rightfully comparing to the student debt conversation. So just as a reminder here, the NBER analysis of the PPP loans found that 75% of the PPP funds went to business owners, shareholders, creditors, and suppliers, and roughly 25% to workers who would have otherwise lost their jobs. So in other words, a vast majority of the PPP loans, which the entire idea of that policy was to keep workers on the payroll, the vast majority of that money went directly into the pockets of the shareholders and the executives and the business owners, instead of actually going to the workers who only got a measly 25%. Okay, so again, want to talk about a wealth transfer? There's many different ways that we could give a critique in terms of wealth transfers in this country. You could also talk about the military budget, a direct wealth transfer from the poorest Americans in this country, from the general taxpayer base to wealthy defense contracting companies that make billions of dollars selling weapons of destruction and death around the world. I mean, so many different ways we could talk about a wealth transfer. The idea that these motherfuckers, conservatives, don't believe in wealth transfers, that's all that they believe in. That's all that capitalism is a direct wealth transfer from the workers, the people who actually provide the labor that provides the value for these companies, and giving that wealth transfer in the form of profits or surplus value to the capitalists, to the owners of these businesses, okay? Their entire economic ideological framework is centered around expropriating and doing a massive wealth transfer from workers to the business ownership class. So just a completely insane argument there, but they continue here saying that all of the sources cautioned that no decisions have been made, and as of Thursday. Last Thursday, no lawsuits appeared to have been filed. I'm sure we're going to be seeing that in the coming days or weeks. And they say, but a legal battle could carry stark financial consequences for millions of student borrowers who rejoiced last week after Democrats delivered on a long-standing promise to erase some of their debt. And they say the possible litigation also raises the prospect of a broader precedent-setting courtroom tussle over the scope of the president's economic authority. And they say such a lawsuit could reach the Supreme Court. We know how the Supreme Court would rule on a case like this, thrusting it back into the spotlight after it infuriated Democrats by stripping abortion protections and limiting the EPA's power to respond to climate change. So again, we have a completely hijacked right-wing reactionary Supreme Court right now. If this or any of these cases end up going to the Supreme Court, very confident that they would rule on the side of conservatives and just arbitrarily say that this is an invalid justification. But on the other hand, you also do have somewhat of a critique from or towards the Biden administration on this, in that instead of going with the 1965 Higher Education Act, which I'll give you a perspective on here in a second, instead of using that justification, which I think has much more solid legal grounds, they decided to go with the 2003 HEROES Act as an emergency justification for the pandemic to justify canceling these loans. So they did kind of open the door there for conservatives to bring a legal challenge under that justification. So I think there's a critique of the Biden administration's approach to the student debt cancellation, but either way, these attacks coming from conservatives just expose who they actually work for. They work for the richest in this country, and they just will not have the idea that some Americans or millions of Americans are going to be relieved of some of their debt. Okay, so they continue here saying that the Biden administration has been adamant that its policy is legal. The Justice Department released a 25-page memo last week justifying debt cancellation as appropriate under a 2003 law giving the executive branch broad authority to overhaul student loan programs. And that law was passed in the aftermath of the September 11th terrorist attacks and gave the president the authority to cancel student debt in connection with national emergencies, which the White House says includes the ongoing pandemic. So I think that's somewhat of a justified argument there, right? We do obviously still have COVID as an ongoing pandemic and what should be considered a national emergency. Now, of course, conservatives don't really believe that COVID is a problem in any way whatsoever, and so they wouldn't buy into that argument and are obviously going to be challenging it along those grounds. But they say that the White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment Wednesday evening, and Bharat Ramamurthy, deputy director of the White House National Economic Council, stressed to reporters last week that Biden was using the same authority that the Trump administration had invoked to extend a pause on student loan payments earlier in the pandemic. So that's a pretty strong argument there, that this is the same legal justification that the Trump administration used to justify those loan pauses, right? Pretty much the same exact justification there. So I don't know how conservatives are going to dance around that, but they say that has not been challenged in court. It has not been found improper by a court. It's the same statute that the previous administration used and that we've used, that we are now using for this action. So maybe that's part of the reason why they decided to go with this justification instead of the 1965 Higher Education Act. Maybe they were thinking this will be easier to argue against conservatives because Trump used the same argument, but we'll have to see how that holds up. Now they give us a little bit of an insight in terms of some of the challenges that are going to be posed for conservatives who are trying to do this. They say Ted Cruz, this absolute corporate ghoul from the state of Texas, who ran for president in 2016, has emerged as one of the leading GOP critics of the plan, but acknowledged in a radio interview released on Wednesday that it remains unclear who will have legal standing or cause to challenge the decision in court. And a spokesperson for Cruz declined to comment, referring a reporter to Cruz's comments in that interview. And Cruz said that the courts are unlikely to deem an average taxpayer as qualified to bring a lawsuit. It may not be possible to find a plaintiff who earned slightly more than the amount necessary to qualify for debt forgiveness, according to the senator, but it is not at all clear a court would buy that argument. So they're really just like grasping at straws here. They say that Cruz added a lawsuit could be filed by a current student who would argue that the debt forgiveness plan will lead to colleges raising tuition and unfairly subjecting students to higher fees. So again, kind of gets to a fundamental problem of having the for-profit college system that we have in place right now, which was ushered in by conservatives historically, like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, as a part of their attacks against public education in general. So you want to look to who to blame for the extreme costs of education in this country, who to blame for the student debt crisis it is conservatives, okay? The idea that like leftists are somehow in favor of these colleges charging exorbitant tuition rates or price gouging students for textbooks and all this other shit, leftists are not in favor of that too, okay? We believe you should be taxing these universities and using a lot of that funding to then provide free public colleges and universities across the board, okay? So you want to talk about actually addressing the underlying problems here of why college is so expensive. It's the left that has the proposals for that, and it's the right that has historically ushered in the problems that we are currently facing right now. So again, the idea that you're going to argue that this is going to lead to colleges raising tuition, okay, maybe, but maybe we should fucking do something about that as well. But he says, the difficulty here is finding a plaintiff who the courts will conclude has standing. That may prove a real challenge. But they say still, conservatives have raced to find a plaintiff, and the president of the Job Creators Network, okay, just an absolutely insane name here for a capitalist organization. It was founded by Bernie Marcus, a GOP donor who started Home Depot, said Wednesday that it is already building a legal team and working with outside advisors on preparing a lawsuit. So that's basically the situation that we have right now. They're going to try to push forward with this. It seems like, at least based on what Ted Cruz, who I guess does have a legal background, not exactly sure how he made it through his elitist education there, but Ted Cruz is even kind of coming out and admitting that their challenge to this is going to be on pretty shaky ground, but that's not going to stop these GOP mega donors and the billionaire class from ensuring that average people are not given even a single ounce of debt relief to free them up to be able to spend that money elsewhere. But again, the Biden administration, I think, did make somewhat of a mistake by going with the 2003 HEROES Act and opening the door for a potential challenge along those grounds. You could have just gone with the 1965 Higher Education Act, but just as a reminder in terms of what that actually says, here from Elizabeth Warren, her office actually put out a statement on this describing it. They say, is administrative debt cancellation legal? Yes, Congress has already granted the Secretary of Education the legal authority to broadly cancel student debt under Section 432A of the Higher Education Act of 1965, which grants the Secretary the authority to modify, compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand, however acquired, including any equity or right of redemption. So there you go. I mean, it's right there in the 1965 Higher Education Act. You could have made it along those grounds. You could have made that your legal framework that you're arguing this under. Not exactly sure why the Biden administration didn't choose to go with that pathway, but now we're just left with a situation where even this like measly milquetoast student debt cancellation, right? I'm not trying to completely downplay it because it will actually help millions of people, not just because of the $10,000 to $20,000 in student debt cancellation, but also because of the way that they restructured the payments so that even people who are taking on new loans right now that won't be able to get that $10,000 to $20,000 in forgiveness, Biden basically halved the amount that they are going to be paying in interest and paying on their principal payments every month. So, and also associated that with the amount that you are earning in income. So there are plenty of different parts which are like commendable in terms of Biden doing something that actually goes a little bit beyond what I anticipated he was going to do with student debt cancellation. I basically thought he was going to do jack shit. I thought he was going to do nothing, but now we're left with a situation where even this means-tested, watered-down student debt cancellation plan, which he's not even going the full reach of what he has the executive authority to do, is still going to be challenged by conservatives. They're still losing their goddamn minds, coming out with any talking points that they could possibly imagine in order to try to, again, prevent working class, average middle class families from getting even an ounce of relief. And understand, this is all a part of them trying to keep the working class suppressed. They want people to be in debt. They want people to be, suffering under the burden of this debt so that they are more easily able to be exploited by capitalists, by these corporations as well. That's why you see the motherfucker GOP donor, the Bernie Marcus guy from Home Depot, him coming out to bat and trying to strike this down. They don't want people to get any relief whatsoever. They want all of these handouts to go to the billionaire class, to corporate America. And when it comes to anything that could actually materially improve the lives of working class people, they are going to come out and show their ass to the country in terms of what they actually believe in. And believe it or not, it is not in serving the interests of the working class.